Hello and welcome to Peace Conversations. My name is Gary Walpole. I'm pastor of Peace Community of Faith, a progressive and multi-generational faith community connected up with the United Methodist Church. Our topic this morning is God, the Heart of Reality. It's based on a book by Marcus Borg called, I do not remember what it's called. Somebody tell me what it's called.
The Heart of Christianity.
The Heart of Christianity. Okay, so let's get into it. What thoughts do folks have?
This was a difficult chapter to read. So I read it, I think, 4 times. So I've got some questions.
Okay. Anybody else have anything they want to share before Sharon can delve into her questions?
Go ahead. We'll have our
Go
time.
ahead, Sharon.
Okay, my first question is on page 65. So
Okay.
if someone has comments prior to that page,
Well,
Let me
they
know.
can throw them up anywhere, anytime they want to, depending on where they come from.
okay,
You go ahead.
page 65 under 2 concepts of God.
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, the 4th paragraph down, supernatural theism imagines God as a person-like being. To be sure, God is an exceedingly superlative person-like being, is indeed the supreme being. A long time ago, this person-like being created the world as something separate from God. So are they talking about then a superlative person like, a supreme being who created a God? And so we've got
No,
two big guys.
No.
no. This is just the thing that's been taught in the churches for the last few hundred years, over and over, that God is the big guy in the sky looking down and manipulating everything. That's all it's referring to.
But this person-like being, created the world as something separate from God. It sounds to me like we're talking about 2 things.
So
I mean,
Sharon,
2 people, 2 beings.
I bet you know the Apostles' Creed, don't you?
Yeah.
The first affirmation of the Apostles' Creed is, I believe in God the Father Almighty.
Mm-hmm.
That's your supernatural, personal, divine being. Okay.
Okay.
One of the primary characteristics of God is that then the second line is, who created heaven and earth.
Right.
So that is what Marcus Borg is really talking about there. He's just using different language.
Okay.
There has always been a divine being, and that divine being created heaven and earth separate from, okay?
God's in heaven, we're on earth.
Wait, separate from?
Separate from that divine being. So that divine being may have, in the beginning with Adam and Eve, walked in the garden. Okay.
Okay.
Know that story? Adam and Eve kind of hanging out, God walking with them in the garden.
Yes.
That was not God's home. God can come and hang out with Adam and Eve, but in the end, he goes back home to heaven.
Right.
Okay. So that's what he's talking about, that there's a divine being that at the leisure or will of that divine being can come and down to earth and intervene.
And is separate from the creation.
But is completely separate from creation.
Okay.
Okay.
And to be clear, he's not arguing that this is the case. He's just describing this concept of the supernatural theism.
Oh, created the world as something separate from God.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay. I got it.
So oftentimes, let me give you two examples. There's a passage in the book of the prophet Isaiah, where it talks about God being a potter, and
Mhm,
God creates pottery,
mhm.
but that pottery is not God. It is separate from God. It's just like, the ceramic plates we have in our kitchen.
Right.
Okay. So it is almost an image of a watchmaker who makes a complex watch, but then gives it to somebody and doesn't have anything to do with it anymore.
Right. Okay. I think I was misreading this sentence.
So, anybody else have anything to add into before Sharon goes to her next?
On that's where I see it is that's where and that philosophy is people created God in their image. So it created God as an entity, a person who did this of a volition like a person has to create something. I can create a garden. I can create, build a machine. God created the world. They created
Right.
God in our image, so they see God as a person,
Right.
separate that you talk to and as a person.
Yeah.
And that's as I say, that's when I reference people, in that philosophy created God in their image. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Hmm.
I do want to add kind of a note to what Borg says. This was the natural way that everyone, everywhere, understood God before the Industrial Revolution.
Maybe in Christianity.
Well, not only in Christianity, but also in the Jewish faith and in the Hindu faith, in the Islamic faith. It was
Buddhism, not so.
well, Buddhism, not so, except for in the sense it grew out of and what was able to influence Eastern culture, because it's an Eastern tradition. Every world religion before the Industrial Revolution always had a cultural context. Okay. There was no world religion per se that we're talking about until there was an ability for people to move all around the world.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
So the Hindu faith, the Buddhist faith, what was strong in Eastern culture and may have made some inroads in the Middle East. Christianity, Islam, and the Jewish faith before Industrial Revolution, were strong in Middle East, in Europe, in Africa, and in North America and South America.
Mm.
Basically because with Christianity, Europeans were able to jump on ships and go convert people in different continents.
Hmm.
So it is really with the birth of the industrial age that we are able to talk about world religions, so that every different type of world religion is on every different continent. Okay. That's really kind of a new thing.
Hmm.
But so, and I kind of took us on what I sidetracked us. So I want to get back. The way that Marcus Borg is talking about God is really a reflection of the modern era, as he's saying, that we live in. So I sidetracked us, so I'm going to come on back. Anybody that has anything they want to share? So what other thoughts do folks have?
I have another question.
Yeah, that's cool. Does anybody else have anything before we go back to Sharon? You always have good questions, so go out there, Sharon.
Well, this was a confusing chapter to me. There's just a lot in it. Okay, so under two concepts of God, starting on page 65, we've got supernatural theism and panentheism. And he's talking about panentheism on page 67, second paragraph. Because panentheism does not speak of divine intervention, people often wonder what happens to prayer in this context.
Okay.
And this is blah, blah, blah. And then the start of the next paragraph, panentheism does not deny the efficacy of such prayer. Its framework allows for prayers to have effects, including prayers for healing. But then at the bottom of 67, it says, except in the very general sense of divine intentionality and divine interactivity, panentheism does not claim to have an explanation of the God-world relation. It is content not to know. And I that just really upsets me. It is content not to know. I don't like that. So
Yeah.
Please explain that whole thing to me.
Okay. Anybody can do it shorter than I could is more than happy to jump in.
Mostly because I'm looking for, prayers for healing.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that.
I'll jump in when you're done, but I've got different feelings on that.
Okay. We live within our modern, and I would say even postmodern era, with what Marcus Borg wants to suggest are two different ways of thinking about God. They are both modern and ancient. So you can find these two different concepts both in the Hebrew sacred story and the Christian sacred story, Islamic sacred story. Both of these are in the sacred stories of the world religion. But one had been emphasized more in the past, and the other now is gaining some strength in the present. So hopefully, in a very summary fashion, the image of God, or the way of thinking about God, that has been dominant throughout human history is that God is a divine being that created heaven and earth, but is not part of creation, but can intervene in creation. That has been the predominant way of thinking about God. The other way that I think Marcus Borg wants to say, at least for him, is the more important. I'm going to go. He talks about Paul in Acts, that God is who we live in and with and among and under, that all of, okay, remember the title of the chapter, that God is the heart of reality. So there is no need for that second understanding of God to intervene because all of reality is lived into that idea of God. So that's why he says his word is panentheism, God within all. There is no need for God to intervene if God is in all and the heart of reality.
Is that what you believe, Gary?
That's what I believe.
So where does healing come in?
Okay.
Because some people are healed and some aren't.
Okay. Well, I was going to wait till one of the crucial things I think Borg misses about God. My favorite phrase for God is spirit.
Mhm.
That's what infuses all of reality. I'm going to go farther and say God is the spirit of life. Okay.
Mhm.
That's the reality that I think of when I think of God infusing all reality.
By making it shorter and you just say God is, because
Mhm.
God is all, whether it's
Yeah.
alive or not alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he makes that point later on. He just wants to say God is. And
Right.
that is infuses all reality.
Right. So, yeah.
Go ahead, Chuck.
There's a few things here with his. I know he wants to separate the supernatural paradigm from the pantheism, but I know that he doesn't fully let go of the supernatural because of the terminology he uses, and the fact that he hangs on to that terminology and says, "I still pray to a personal God, and it's okay. I still talk about it that way, and it's okay," I think is a mistake. That's like saying I'm not racist, but it's always that I'm not this, but if when you get the new paradigm, when you start to feel that new paradigm, when you connect with it, he used the term transformative. I think that's a very good term. It is transformative. It changes how you see, how you exist, how you feel, and with that transformation needs to come new terminology. And if we use the old terminology, it's like teaching kids about the Bible stories and in the old idea of a super God person, and then later going to say, well, we're going to unteach that and tell them the way it really is, never happens. And what you have is adults that are stuck hard in a way that they grew up because we don't let go of stuff that we learned as a kid very easily. It's very difficult without experiences that we have to help us let go of those things. And many people either don't have or don't recognize those experiences. I think the latter is probably true. Don't recognize them. So I think it's really important to begin to find new terminology and use new terminology. Sharon, when you ask about prayer, with the supernatural God, people are asking for somebody to help them. There are beings. When I think of a self of beings, primarily spirit, primarily whatever that means. I don't know exactly, but I just know that it exists well without the body. It doesn't exist the same because when the body's released, the limits of our existence changes. But within the body, we're very limited in the body, and the body wants to be in control. And that is one of the problems. It's what keeps us from getting the spirit. The body wants control. It wants to, like Borg does, he wants to analyze everything to death. And when you analyze it and twist words around it, you begin to lose it. Because the thing about spirit is you have to exist it, feel it, and to do that, you have to let go of the words. That is the hard thing in finding that path. It's not that it's hard to get there, because when you touch it, you say, this is natural, this is home, it's where I belong. How come I can't find this? Because the body wants to always be talking, analyzing, trying to figure it out. And as we're doing that, we're losing the feeling, the existing, the being, and the isness of it. and to try to quiet down with meditation, with whatever tools we have, to find that, that's when it surfaces. Because like I said, God never leaves you, never lets you go, because it's what you're made of. That's why it never lets you go. It's because what you are. And to have that surface and connect, you become connected. An artist or a writer says, I didn't write this. This just came through me. That's that connection. It's not that they're all of God and all of everything. They are connected. It's like molecules in the air. We're all connected, moving around. But when we limit ourselves,
So
and
Chuck,
the one term I use,
But I think I did get what you were saying, Chuck, and yes, that makes sense. So thank you.
So Sharon,
Yes.
tell me if you can, how you understood and how what Chuck said helped you.
The more, this is how I understood, and I'm in agreement. The more you try to pin God or a concept of surrounding God, the more you try to pin that down, the less you will have of spirit because, or the isness of God, because one needs to rest in the isness and not be always thinking about somehow pinning it down, which is part of the world, part of the physical, and then you're just losing the isness entirely.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that's what he said. That's what I took from it, and that made sense to me.
and part of that, when you asked about prayer, part of the paradigm of prayer, asking somebody for something, I can kind of, if you want to say prayer, and ask somebody for something, but I'm not expecting something from a God. I believe that we have, and I've experienced it, people, ancestors, friends, we're all kind of in a group, and we help each other through this experience, and we take turns. I've had experiences very clearly like that. That's not God. God is the soup we're living in. We're just living in different parts of it, and we can work together. When you're out in a walk and you watching, like Lisa loves to take beautiful pictures of like insects on flowers, paying attention to little detail, and you kind of get immersed in it. That's prayer. You are tying into something else. When you look at a person and you see the spirit in them as you see it in yourself, and you almost feel like you're looking at a reflection of yourself in a different life or different, then you're making that connection. To me, that's prayer. You're making that connection. It's very healing, and it's very calming in the soul to get that. Sometimes things can take you out of your comfort zone, but in a way they're growing you. Things that grow you and make you more whole in that world, to me, that is prayer. And when you are praying and thinking about somebody's health, I think you're also, it's like a pond. When you drop the rock in the pond and the waves go out, they go out and come back. We're all connected. There's not a big division between us that we see. And these things come back. So the prayer or your thoughts are very much real things, and they affect others around us. A person can walk into a room and crush the room, just walking in with the wrong spirit. Another person can come in and you just feel clear. You feel a calmness. There's an eminence from us that connects, and how when you pray, we should be connecting with what heals and what grows, as opposed to what destroys.
That great point. I know Dan has something he wanted to share, so if it's okay, I just want to go to Dan here. Okay?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
thanks.
Dan.
Thanks. Yeah, so I just think about how, to me, it seems like Marcus is saying he doesn't necessarily believe in a God who intervenes. So, when you hear sports players after the football game talking about how God helped them win this game or something like that, it seems very silly to me. But even when people pray for healing or things like that, it seems to me that God or Marcus doesn't necessarily believe that. However, he does pray. And I think about it when I pray with my kids at night. It's just more about what are you thankful for, kind of, putting those thoughts in our, maybe not praying for something specifically to happen to you, but, just being appreciative of what happened to you that day. Seems normal because I grew up that way. And it seems like that's kind of what Marcus is saying. Is that, Gary, do you agree with that?
I do. I want to touch base on prayer from the two basic different understandings of God. When I grew up, what I was taught was that, God created heaven and earth, but is separate from heaven and earth. Therefore, when I pray, often when I ask for something for myself or someone else, it was always asking God to intervene on my behalf or somebody else's behalf. So here's the example for you, Sharon. When I am in significant pain, okay, if I pray hard enough and I'm a good enough person, God will come and heal my pain. If my pain doesn't go away, that means God doesn't care enough about me because I am not good enough. Therefore, I need to continue to live with my pain and try to become a better person. In the other way of looking at God, the assumption is God is in everything, including the pain that I experience, but there is no condition because I know God always loves me no matter what. So one of the phrases I like to use now for prayer is sitting in the loving embrace of God. So it's not so much that when I pray is that I think I'm in control or that God is in control. But I know God loves me, and that's my given. And God is going to help me any way God can. Even if I need to live with the pains that I have in my life for the rest of my life. So, you see the difference?
I do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? We got, there's lots here in the chapter, and as Sharon said, there's a whole lot here, and it's very complex. What other thoughts do folks have?
Kind of going off of what you're just talking about, at the bottom of 76 and the top of 77 talks about God's grace.
Mhm.
And God's acceptance of us is unconditional, not dependent upon something that we believe or do. We often put conditions on God's grace. God accepts you if, and whenever an if clause is added, grace becomes conditional and ceases to be grace.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
trying to let go of that. I have to pray harder. I have to be better. I have to do more concept and accept the unconditional grace.
Mhm.
It's not easy to do, to tell you the truth.
I have another question.
Okay.
Right beneath what Lisa was talking about, I'm on page 77. The first full paragraph, the last sentence or two, is the basis for our life with God law or grace, requirements and rewards, or relationship and transformation? God affirms the latter. So my question is, in my mind, in the Old Testament, people believed in both law and grace, requirements and rewards. Is that true? When I think about the stories in the Old Testament, I see both happening.
I think you're right, Sharon,
I
in
think
that.
Gary's back.
Oh, he's back.
Go ahead.
Okay.
That there are stories both about the requirements, the rewards, but also the grace. Right, you're correct, Sharon. There are stories about
Okay.
both.
So I'm sorry, Lisa, what did you just say?
You were asking about particularly the Old Testament and
Yeah.
the two types, about unconditional grace, but also the kind of the requirements and rewards kind of stories. as
Yeah.
well.
Borg says, last sentence, grace affirms the latter. And so is Borg saying that the Old Testament folks believed? I thought Borg was saying the Old Testament folks believed in grace, but I see that they believed in both law and grace. Am I reading that correctly?
If you are reading it with a sense that when we think of laws passed and implemented in the United States today,
Mhm.
when we think of law or laws, that's what we think of, then that's incorrect, because law did not mean that in the time of Jesus.
Oh,
Okay. The Hebrew word for law is Torah. Does that ring a bell?
yes.
Okay. Carol, you still with us? There we go. I just wanted to make sure you're still here. And for them, that is embodied in the first 5 books of the Bible.
The law,
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Yes.
right.
Any kind of laws, otherwise the do's and don'ts, okay, because that's what we often think of, are the do's and don'ts are the law, all have to do with how to practice the Jewish faith. Okay. The vast majority of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy are stories that tell us how we should live. Okay. So another way to interpret Torah is the way we walk. How is God asking us to live? And all the stories are filled with tremendous amounts of grace. Okay. Even though Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, God still offers them grace, and they still continue to live. Okay. Again and again, Abraham and Sarah are doing things that put at risk God's promise to them. But then God is always showing them grace. Always, always, always. The same with Isaac and Jacob, the same with King David. The stories are filled with grace.
Mhm.
What has happened, at least in my life, I have been taught not to see that grace in the stories of the Old Testament. There has always been grace. There's always been love. There's always been justice in the Hebrew story as well as the Christian story. The issue becomes, how were we taught our sacred story? So there's me going on some more. I want to kind of open it up for anybody. Sharon, do you have any more questions? Did we get through all your questions?
I'm good. I did think that the statements on page 74 under the character of God, what is your God? What is the character of your God? I thought these were really good questions to think about. And also how I used to think about God and how I now think about God. And it'll be interesting to me how I think about God in the future.
So for the sake of those that are not here during this session, they are very short questions that are worth pondering. So Sharon, I'm wondering if you're willing to read those questions about God's character.
Sure. Primarily, is God a God primarily concerned about personal virtue? Primarily a lawgiver and judge, somebody you need to measure up to? A God of requirements and rewards? Primarily a God of heaven and hell? Primarily a national God? Mostly nice? Mostly indifferent? A God of compassion? A God of social justice? I'm sorry. Many times I have to think, oh no, I don't think about God that way anymore. This is a better way to think about God. So I'm still doing that shift.
And that list of questions is kind of an introduction before he talks about the two ways of imagining God's character. The first one is God is a God of requirements and rewards. And the second one is to see God as a God of law and justice.
But you know, I still see the Old Testament as being a lot of God is a God of justice. And I see that as being retribution. And the New Testament is God is a God of love. Because of the stories in the Old Testament. And they're very different than stories in the New Testament.
So is God, as God appears in the book of Revelation, a God of love or a God of judgment?
Judgment.
Okay. When Jesus tells a parable about the sheep and the goats and the separating of the sheep and the goats, is God a God of love or a God of judgment?
Judgment. I think the difference in my mind is that in the Old Testament, it was like big wars and huge groups of people that were influenced one way or the other. And the New Testament is individuals who are healed. That's kind of how I think about the two testaments.
You know, there's also healings in the Old Testament, probably as many as there are in the Gospels. And there is just as much judgment in the Gospels in the New Testament as there is in the Old Testament.
Okay.
Once again, I want us to be able to ponder, how are we taught to see the Old Testament and the New Testament? We got about 2 minutes before we need to wind it up. I want to invite anybody that may have anything to share. When we get to within about 30 seconds, I will invite us to close it up. I did want to give an opportunity one more time.
There was something in here that I understand the essence of what he's saying, but again, the terminology I didn't quite agree with, kind of like in the last chapter when he was talking about a true story. I don't like the terminology of true story when it's not the right, when it wasn't factual, I guess. And so in that chapter, I was saying truth was a better word for me than true story. There was something else in this chapter that was kind of similar. It was like I understand what he's saying, but I don't think it's the best way to say it. And I'm sorry, I didn't circle it here, so I can't tell you what it was, but
I think that's good because I think the invitation is to use Borg as a sounding board for us to kind of work on what God is for us or for me. And it's nice that he sets up two different ways of seeing God. In a way, I don't think it's an either or, but it's a good sounding board for us to intentionally think about what do I believe today that may be different than what I may have believed in the past. And that's what Sharon had brought up earlier. She's learning her way into a new understanding of God.
Mhm.
Okay. And I think as we all grow in faith, we all do that in our own way. So we are at 10 o'clock. I want to thank you all for being part of this. Same time next week, we're going to move on, and the topic for next week is about Jesus. So thank you
All right.
all very much.
Thank
and
you.
We will see you. Take care. Have a good rest of the day.